Okay, well, we're going to shift gears, and Stacy and Dave did such a nice job of kind of setting things up. And these processes look very similar, even though it's different core subjects and different grade levels. So we hope to gain some efficiency with things they've already told you. So we're going to talk about elementary K-5 health curriculum adoption. And this one is a little different than the process that Dave and Stacy just described, because it got started prior to the pandemic and then was interrupted by the pandemic. So it was paused essentially, and then we picked it back up and finished it up in this school year. So we'll kind of walk you through that so you can see what it looks like. All the pieces and parts were covered of a regular adoption process, but it just was stretched out over a longer period of time. So I'm going to start with just a little bit of background and context, and then I'm going to walk you through what we did for the adoption steps, and then finish with some rationale. And I also want to just do a little homage to Stacy's amazing presentation. Mine is like the kindergarten version. So we're heading downhill as we go, but we'll pick it back up. So our goal in this is really to select high quality instructional materials that are going to support and engage kids in learning experiences that help them build knowledge and skills necessary to develop health literacy. And that health literacy helps them develop and maintain and promote a healthy lifestyle, which is something I think we all are striving for in one way or another. Managing two things here. Let's see how well I do. So Dave described step one to you, which really starts at the state level. So our state goes through a whole vetting process for each core subject annually, not each subject annually, but each subject as it comes up on a 7-year cycle. And they go through a vetting process, and it's pretty detailed process that's outlined by state laws. And then they produce a list of approved materials, and they also share with us the details of their scoring and the analysis of those materials, which is helpful. So what districts get to do then, once those state materials are on a list, we get to either select. We go through our own adoption process, which we'll talk about in a minute. We get to either select something from that approved list, or we can do what's called an independent adoption, which essentially means different materials that might not have been on the list, but have to be vetted and with the same tools and criteria as the state uses, or we can postpone adoption. And all of those things happen in all districts all the time in different ways. And so what we did for this one, ultimately, let's see. Little pop, there we go. What we did for this one ultimately was that we selected a curriculum off their approved list. There were two different sets of curriculum that were approved for K through 5. And so we looked at both of those and are going to be recommending one. We'll give you more details about that in a second. All right, let's see if that works. Good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the adoption process. And again, this is going to look slightly different than what Dave and Stacy just described. So health and PE were up for adoption at the same time. So we were running that process simultaneously, and we used the same team members, because in our district prior to this adoption, largely health topics were taught by specialists. So counselors, PE teachers, nurses, with a little bit being taught without curriculum in the classroom. So we started with a team that was strong with those team members that had that context. So we had 3 counselors on the team, 2 PE teachers, 2 nurses, we had an instructional coach, 1 elementary school administrator, and 2 district administrators. So we kind of partnered up a little bit with the student support department in the beginning part of this process. And then we knew we would include our pilot would include strong support from our classroom teachers. So the process is similar to what Dave described. For us, we started with what they called a regional caravan, and those used to be in person back in the day. Now they've been virtual, but basically the Department of Education brings out training and support both on the publisher side of things. So they're teaching us about the curriculum and showing us all the bells and whistles. And then also we have members of the Oregon Department of Education who are specialists in this field talking to us about the recent standards updates. Typically on the cycle of adoption, the Department of Ed will update standards just prior to the adoption of materials. So for us, typically an adoption starts with kind of seeing what those new standards look like and understanding them. And then part of our work is that we sink a little bit further into those standards. We've been busy with that process for social sciences just recently and finding out where the gaps are in what we've been currently doing and what's new to us. And that helps us then to use that as a filter as we're looking at the materials. So another part of the process is that we do, and this really is what is the bulk of the work, is it takes time for us to do an analysis of those materials, right? We dig into them, we're looking at them, often using the tool that's similar to the one that the State Department uses. And so we're looking at things like alignment to standards. We're looking for, do the materials have good differentiated supports for different needs of different learners? We're looking at, are the materials engaging? What and how are they engaging? We're looking at extensions and supports for educators. And then we're also looking at, are there elements of that support us monitoring student progress in that work? So there's a whole period of time where we're spending lots of time looking at the materials and doing an analysis, and also reading the analysis from the state level. So just kind of comparing our local analysis to their analysis. So out of that, we only had we were only looking at the 2 curriculum materials that were vetted at the state level and approved at the state level. Both of them were good. One is The Great Body Shop, which is published by Children's Health Market. The other, and I'm gonna have to, I don't remember the name of it, Health and Wellness, and the publisher is McGraw-Hill. And McGraw-Hill just happens to be the publisher of our language arts curriculum, which is going to be up for renewal next year. So we're familiar with McGraw-Hill, and both of these were good. We felt like were good materials, but we definitely landed in one direction, and we, the team, unanimously recommended and selected The Great Body Shop for further kind of exploration. And so I want to talk a little bit about the why behind that. But before I get to that rationale, I just want to identify that next steps for us as we were kind of buttoning up that initial analysis was that we wanted to plan for a pilot of those materials, which is a typical part, as you heard Stacy and Dave talk about. Like, we want to road test that curriculum. We want to see what it looks like and feels like with real kids, real teachers, real classrooms. And so we agreed that that would be a good next step, and also introducing it to staff and getting more feedback there, and then making materials available to the public for review and gathering feedback. So those were our plans. Then, and here's, before I go to then, here's some of the rationale that we used for the selection. Again, the unanimous selection of the Great Body Shop materials. And really, these were the things that we had identified prior as some of the things that we were looking for in the curriculum. Health, of all the, so what's an essential difference for curriculum adoption between secondary and elementary is that a single elementary teacher teaches all subjects every day. And so the impact of a single adoption across the elementary system is a fairly big impact, because they're, literally teaching 5 different sets of curriculum with 5 different digital platforms and lots of different materials, and getting used to a sort of a different framework for everyone. So for health, we knew that health proportionately, we're in the business of teaching kids to read. That's our primary goal and concern. And other subjects are important, but we know at the elementary level that language arts and math receive the biggest attention from us. And that's, we're unapologetic about that. That's important, right? So health relatively is going to receive less time. And so we wanted to have that as a filter in our thinking. So the Great Body Shop materials, and you have, I noticed that you've opened these up. I should have said something about this to you sooner, but they're organized, it's not like books and then a whole bunch of other books, but it's these pamphlets. They call them student issues. And there's one for each unit, and that units are organized around topics, health topics. And that, just that, the simplicity of that felt very easy to implement. It felt very accessible for kids. And you can see, as you look at them, they're colorful and they've got cartoons. So they felt very age appropriate. They're kind of non-threatening for most people. So they felt just, again, that ease of implementation, the accessibility, that's kind of student-friendly, age-appropriate stuff was just hitting like the right notes for us as we were kind of leaning into health adoption, which we knew was going to be a sensitive topic, right? We knew that, that was sort of part of our filter right from the beginning. The other big thing that we liked about this material is it has a real strong opportunity for partnership with families. So on the back of each of those student issues is something called a family bulletin, and it provides families ideas and ways that they can say, okay, we would send these home at the end of instruction, and families then can look at that together, talk about how that works in our family, their suggestions and prompts in that family bulletin. So again, that partnership for parents, that accessibility, that age appropriate take on things. Also, the materials are available in Spanish, which for us is one of our strong filters. So those were some of the big reasons that we felt like this would be a good step in. And these are, there are 10 different student issues. And so it's easy to make those accessible to parents prior to instruction. We're going to talk more about that in a minute, just that whole parent partnership, transparency, notification, opt-out piece. So I want to jump back to what happened in the adoption process. So we made a decision to delay the pilot by a year. And the reason we made that decision was because we had a big dog of science coming down the pipe. And you asked the question, Sean, is the Amplify Science the same as the ELA? It is the same company, and science is a big adoption. It comes with lots of stuff, and the Amplify materials come with both paper materials, they come with digital materials, and then they come with investigation materials. So boxes of, as we make, we make a joke all the time, like we remember back when we were in school and you got like bags of sea monkeys or diatomaceous or whatever. I mean, it's like literally all those fun things that we can do experiments with. But science adoption was being implemented in the 2018-19 school year. And again, going back to that idea of that big lift, it was going to require a ton of training, a ton of time and focus for teachers to do it well. And we just felt like relatively health was a smaller thing. And so we wanted to give it its own breathing space in a pilot. And so we made a decision, and we knew at the time there was going to be a worldwide pandemic, but we made a decision to bump it to 1920. We also were in some cost saving measures in that 17-18 to 18-19 transition, and that was a way for us to save a little bit of money as well. But the big issue was the science implementation. So then 1920 and 2021, where everything, all curriculum adoption was paused. So in retrospect, yeah, we might have been able to get maybe part of a year of health adoption under our belts before everything blew up, and we'd be kind of restarting again anyway. So we're not, looking backward, but the timing was interesting. So this year we picked up where we left off. We rebooted, and we selected Tumalo Community School to be the place where we were doing our pilot. I want to talk a little bit about why Tumalo, because we knew that was a very purposeful choice on our part. One, Tumalo is a smaller school and has similar resources to some of our bigger schools in terms of full-time counselor, full-time PE teacher, and nursing that's spread across a smaller population. And because we wanted to test out the opportunity for a shared teaching model where counselors, nurses, PE teachers were coming alongside classroom teachers and supporting together the scope of this curriculum, we felt like Tumalo, there would be greater flexibility at a smaller school. Another reason for why Tumalo was they have a really stable teaching staff. They've been together as a team for a long time. There's been very little movement of staff, between grade levels, a little bit, but not as much as we see in some of the larger schools. And so they kind of got their jam going in terms of partnership, and they know how to work well with each other. They know where their strengths lie, and that's really good in terms of planning collaboratively. Supports that strongly. We also, their counselor, Meredith White, and their Wayne Donahue are both very eager. We're both very eager to be part of the pilot. And so that eagerness was enticing to us as well, because we knew they'd really take it up and take it seriously. And then finally, Tony Vignier, who has served as their interim principal this year, who I can't say enough thank yous about. He's done an amazing job out there. Just so happens that he came from a district that was using this curriculum. Just so happens. That was serendipitous. We didn't plan it that way, but he had familiarity with the curriculum. He had familiarity with the kind of transparency piece, which again, we'll talk about in a minute. And he really has supported strongly in this process. So I have invited him, and I think he's lurking. I can see his name. He's lurking there in the shadows. I've invited him to, just for a second, tell you about two parts of the pilot that were super important to us. One is, how do they structure the shared teaching? Because we really wanted to try that out. And they had a very specific structure that might not be replicable at all schools, just because of the staffing availability, but it gave us some really good ideas. And then the second part is Tony led very strongly on the parent transparency, making sure that we're notifying parents ahead of time what topics are coming up, making sure that parents have easy access to the curriculum so that they want to come in and take a look at it, they could, and then also providing really easy access to opt-out options for parents. So I want Tony to just want to welcome Tony. Hi, Tony. And then just give him an opportunity to tell you a little bit about that.
Well, good evening. Thanks for having me here. And thanks for having me in Redmond School District. It's been a delight. I didn't think K-5 would be as much fun as it was. Two parts. Number one, fidelity, and number two, transparency. So I'm going to talk about fidelity first. I wanted to make sure that every kid had equal access to the curriculum so that we can get input from those parents that were involved. So the model that we chose was a model in which kids had Meredith and Megan sometimes teaming up, sometimes separately, would teach on a week 1, week 3, and the classroom teacher would teach a lesson week 2, week 4, with a 45 minutes every week approximate time. That this is 30 to 45 minutes. We would just wanted to make sure that it wasn't lost in the shuffle with all the things going on. So I guarantee that our kids were getting access to our health curriculum, so that we could go through this pilot with a lot of fidelity. Number 2, transparency. From the beginning, it was really clear that this was something that the board, Linda, Sharan, everybody agreed that we're big in this, and we want to make sure we do this right. So I included an opt-out letter, a letter that described the unit that was going to be taught, and a scanned color copy of the back page, which I think you had a chance to look at. That went to every family in English and Spanish. The back page was a little tricky with the Spanish version, but went to every family 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time. It also went in our newsletter, which was 2 weeks ahead of when we started the next unit. Gave families 2 methods in order to look at what was going to be taught, look at the family bulletin in the back, which is what they typically would get at the end, and then make an educated decision on whether they wanted their child to be involved with that. So we included that in every unit that we taught this year, and I felt like that was a successful process, and it's vetted, and we tried it. Now we have that available for all schools in the district, assuming this is adopted. So that I was pretty true to that process. That was real important to us, and it was also real important as to that we did it with fidelity. So I'm open for any questions.
Tony, just one really quickly, because you and I were talking about this today. How many parents did you have that selected the opt-out for this curriculum specifically?
We had 2 kindergarten parents and 2 4th grade parents opt out of units that were linked to health, but not specifically to the Great Body Shop. Nobody opted out of the Great Body Shop. We did have people come in and look at the curriculum in the building after they got their message, but nobody chose to opt out of the Great Body Shop. Erin's Law and personal safety, those were 2 areas that people did choose to opt out of, but nothing in this area.
So while we have Tony still here, any quick questions for Tony, and then I'm gonna share with you some of the feedback we got from staff and from our making the curriculum available.
I just had we'll have 2 questions. I don't know that the first one is for Tony, so I'll say that one. But what does the opt-out process look like? I know that my experience at Tumalo, sometimes I got emailed the form, sometimes I got sent home. It never really was consistent. So what can you explain what that process looks like? And does it require building principal approval, or can you speak to that?
By me sending that out, I was giving them approval. If they chose to opt out, it was approved. I wanted to make sure that was that we had parent voice in the mix completely. I'm not sure of your previous experience, but this year we had it was in the newsletter every time.
Actual form was in the newsletter?
The form was in the newsletter. Okay. For the first, and when we started not receiving any opt-out forms, I just sent that was probably after the 4th unit went to print, that I started just doing the opt-out letter with the description up above in English and Spanish. That went out every unit that we piloted this year. But it was duplicated with the newsletter in the first 4.
Thank you.
And that's something we've talked about before too, that part of our next steps, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is coming up with a process that's consistent and reliable. Because if you leave it up kind of to each school to do it their own way, it's a bigger challenge. So we're going to work really hard to find like a single system that is reliable and easy to manage.
That makes so much sense. And I'm sure that the teachers out in the buildings would really appreciate having that standardized and streamlined.
Yeah.
And then having it standardized and streamlined then becomes familiar to parents who, and this is a tool that they are familiar with and how to use it. So I would encourage that and applaud that.
All right, we're going to move on because I'm also looking at the time here. Sorry. I'm going to talk a little bit about the input that we got. This is a similar slide. Tony, if you can hear us, thank you again for being part of this after a long day. We appreciate your support and the great job you've done this year.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you, Tony. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
So just like, so one part of our getting input, and again, as part of our IIA AR, which outlines all adoption processes, we have made and are continuing to make the curriculum available for those who want to come in and take a look at it. And we're kind of excited because we've gotten a few customers. So typically that isn't the case. And so I almost feel like every time someone's there, is there someone in there? And I want to go say hi. Michael was in there the other day. Dave out.
Sign up for my list too. I'm missing
But we really appreciate parents taking the time to come in, and we asked for them to provide feedback on a forum where we articulated, like, what do you like about the curriculum? What might some of your concerns be? And do you want a personal follow-up? And so we got a parent that came in today and listed her phone number and her name. And so I'm going to be contacting her so that she can ask specific questions. But we collected that feedback, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute. We also extended the time. So we extended the number of days that the community will have access. So we have a total of 2.5 weeks. And we also have provided some times that are outside of kind of typical work hour, whatever that is, typical work hour time. So earlier in the morning and later in the evening, a variety of those, so that parents who are having trouble getting their family members having trouble getting there have some additional time. So let me show you. Oh, and we also sent that out via the regular channels and suggested for our principals that if you've got someone at your school, similar to what secondary did, that is asking questions about this and has concerns, will you please make sure that you're connecting with them and making sure that they understand this process as well, or this availability as well. Sorry, Chris, it's not advancing. So here's some of the common themes. And again, it's a handful of parents that we've had so far. We're hoping for more, but they provided some good feedback, and there were some common themes. So one of them was something that is the reason that we selected these materials in the first place, is that they're student friendly, colorful, engaging, the cartoons. They felt like they were age appropriate. There were a couple of comments about presentations of health topics, kind of in a simple, accurate, age appropriate, sort of neutral way. One parent specifically said, this is reinforcing what I'm already teaching my kids at home. Another parent said, and I wrote this down specifically for a reason, used exact language. He said that the presentation of materials were neutral and there did not appear to be any attempt to indoctrinate. So I receive emails from parents that have concerns, and that word indoctrination is sometimes in those emails. So concerns about, are these materials like teaching an agenda versus just a health topic? And so I appreciated that specifically, because this was a parent who had that specific concern and came looking through that filter. And he said, I would support the use of these materials. They, to him, felt neutral and age appropriate. There were a couple of comments about liking that parent bulletin and that the materials come home after instruction, so parents can follow up at home with their kids. So there were great opportunities to sort of extend that learning into the home. So we also gathered feedback from Tumalo staff who were the ones helping us with this pilot. And so I'm going to give you some common themes that we heard from their feedback, some likes and some suggestions. So they, and a lot of this really had more to do with the implementation than the actual curriculum itself. And that's super helpful to us because that's going to be some big next steps, is how we structure implementation to really support strong teaching. So part of it was they liked that there was an opportunity for that shared teaching and planning with specialists. That's not typical at the elementary level. Teachers sometimes share teaching, but specialists come in as like guest teachers, but that shared teaching doesn't always happen that way. So there were a lot of comments about that, and the way that Tony structured it, I think, maximized that opportunity. They liked the student materials. They felt like the same comments that parents had made, that they were student friendly. They liked that they had been provided extra time for co-planning. So that's a listen for as we're shifting into implementation, is that we want to make sure we're building in good time for them to plan. They said at the front end of a unit, you should sit down and look at the entire unit, which we know is best practice, but it isn't always realistic for some. So they might do a first part, but they really suggested that you look at the whole thing, because there were places where they could shave some of the repetitive stuff. And they liked what Tony described as the office taking care of parent notification. They felt like that was a smooth system and was reliable, and they didn't have to worry about that. They could put their energy into instruction. And they liked that it was relatively easy to implement. It's not a super complex curriculum. Their suggestions were protecting time in the master schedule for health instruction. So there were lots of comments about it's hard to fit this in. And again, they're coming from the perspective of not really having dedicated time for health instruction, because that's been taught mostly by specialists. So we're in the process now of creating space and time in our master schedule guidelines, specifically that will be a shared space for health, social sciences, and science. Those are three big things, but they'll share a single space in master schedules. The idea about planning ahead for the full unit, which I mentioned, and then teaching the whole unit in 1 week versus 1 day per week. So the materials suggest you can do just 1 day a week, and there are 4 lessons per unit, and then you cover it in a month. Or you could teach every day in 1 month of that week, or in 1 week of that month. And they've been doing the day thing, and there were a few suggestions about, we think it might be better if it was all taught contiguously together in a week of part of the month. Okay. Almost done here. So we also sent a survey out to Tumalo parents, and I'm watching it like multiple times every day. I'm like, why are we getting 0 responses? Because I was sure Tumalo parents are going to be giving us lots of feedback, and that's part of why we were counting, because we knew strong, engaged parent community, and so we really wanted that information. And then we realized there was a glitch in the survey and the sharing permissions. So they weren't getting access. So we fixed that and we resent it out, and we're not getting responses again. So, so I don't know if that just means like we have nothing to say about it and we're busy, and or something different. So Tony and I have done some brainstorming, and he's going to do some specific outreach. And so at the June 22nd meeting, I'm going to come back with information from Tumalo parents to provide you, because that was a super important part of this process.
Right?
Did I activate something? Hey, Siri. So again, just shifting gears now here from feedback to kind of buttoning up this process. I'm just resharing this rationale. And then on top of this, just wanted to add one more piece that was influential to us in our decisions. This curriculum is used in a variety of districts throughout our state and across the nation. And these districts are both districts that are on the western side of the state and on the eastern side of the state. And you know, we have talked to our neighbors, Crook County, who've been using it for a long time, and they say things are going super well. Tony came from McMinnville. He said at the beginning of the adoption and the implementation, similar things were popping up, same stuff that you hear or that I'm getting emailed about. He said that we had that little hump at the beginning, and then it just has been smooth sailing since. So it's been road tested in a lot of places, and we think it hits the right mark of teaching health topics, which can be sensitive in a way that is really age appropriate. And as long as we are doing our responsible job of reaching out to parents prior, providing information about what's coming, allowing them to opt out of specific units or more than that, then we feel like we're getting a balanced approach. So having said all of that, we feel like we've completed the selection process and we're recommending for adoption to the Great Body Shop curriculum for K through 5. And so we'll come back on the 22nd, give you some time to look at the materials. You've got kind of like a board starter packet there, but the wholeness of the materials are also available to you. And if the times that we provided don't work, just reach out to me and we'll make sure that you can get access. And then I'm available to answer any questions that you may have afterward. Once there is an approval, if there is an approval, then we're going to be working hard on next steps, which means adjusting that master schedule, as we talked about, to provide dedicated time so teachers aren't in a scramble trying to find time. Working with elementary principals on that reliable parent notification and opt-out process. Developing a shared teaching framework. So working with our counselors and nurses to see what would be a realistic way to share that teaching responsibility, knowing that they are stretched thinner in some places than they are at Tumalo. Taking a final look at any remaining feedback that's going to come in that would support plans for implementation, and then planning professional development for teachers, which is a key part of implementation of new curriculums. They need to learn how it works and where to access tools and you know what the structure of it is. And the Tumalo teachers, lucky for them, they did hard work this year, but they have a head start moving forward. So that was a lot, but we're available for questions, and then shift it over to the last curriculum presentation of the evening.
So is this something that is bought every year, obviously, because you're sending these home? So what does that look like?
Yeah, thank you, Carrie, for that. So the curriculum is, in my opinion, relatively affordable. So it's about $30,000 for an initial setup, which for a curriculum that covers all of K-5 is really inexpensive. And then the annual cost of that, so we get, you know, teacher materials and digital toolkit for teachers. That's a one-time cost. And then the annual cost is the student issues, those pamphlets. And that's about, I would say it's about 20-something thousand annually for those, which are sent directly to schools and distributed. So it's a pretty slick system, but it does have an annual cost.
And then are these materials updated each year, or is this what we adopt? Is this what we get for 7 years?
Yeah,
Or
good question.
What does that look like?
So they say that they are updated, but I don't, you know, having not experienced that, I don't know how often it happens. I know, for example, for our math materials, part of what we value is that they're updated. But that has, for math, happened like every couple of years. they'll update some of our student workbooks. So
And typically those updates are based off of teacher recommendations to improve the system. Not necessarily for the math.
Not necessarily like the
content, yeah.
material content.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, Carrie, but I can find out how
Thank you.
often.
I wouldn't be surprised if they responded to state laws from time to time as well.
That's true.
And then is board member involvement new to this process?
Yes.
Because I didn't see that
Yes.
piece in there and I'm like, wait a
Yeah.
minute.
I brought that in, like,
Yeah.
to bring board members as part of this process. So.
So the IIAR that we're all getting very familiar with, we didn't have that in place prior when we did the first half of this. So we didn't typically have board members on our adoption processes. So we're glad to have you now.
I think, I mean, as time consuming as it's been, I will tell you how much I appreciate it because
Yeah.
that I think it's important for board members to be familiar with the things that we're approving.
Yeah.
And although I don't think I was on the board when anything got approved, but maybe I was.
The last one was science.
Yeah, and I think that predates
way
me.
before.
Yeah.
So, but I can't imagine not having some sort of eyes on material as team members and being asked to approve it without that. So
It's a big ask of time, but I know just the experience we've had with both Carrie and Liz, who we so appreciate all the time that you've given this year for elementary to social sciences. It's a lot, but your voices are super valuable in that process.
gonna have a harder time with the math.
Well, maybe I could share it or something. The thought that it's always just the two of you every night of your, existence at some meeting.
I'm actually quite grateful for that.
I don't mind it.
I don't hate it.
I don't mind it.
You really don't want to switch it up from year to year. Let's kill anybody.
Carrie secretly loves it.
I actually do. That's why I'm being quiet.
She likes the
Like,
homework.
I'm gonna contain myself. I really like the homework.
She sat with the meetings and it's all fine.
I love it.
So
I appreciate the opportunity to.
it's been a really good value added change. So again, thank you for IIAR, the gift that keeps on giving. So anything else about health before we shift over to a math proposal that we have for you? And then we're gonna leave you alone.
Let's go to math.
Yeah.
We're going to start off with problem solving.
Okay.